Number 7. Gareth P House. Los Angeles police were dispatched to a home in West Hollywood in the early hours of February the 15th of 2020 after they'd received reports of a woman screaming. When officers arrived, they came upon 38-year-old marriage and family therapist Amy Harwick lying unconscious on the ground below the house's third-floor balcony. She'd been left badly injured after an apparent fall, and upon being taken to the hospital, she was pronounced dead. The ensuing police investigation determined that on the night of her death, Harwick had been strangled and thrown from the balcony after being ambushed by her ex-boyfriend, Gareth P House. The victim had previously filed multiple restraining orders against the man, whom she accused of inflicting repeated physical abuse during the course of their relationship. The day after Harwick was killed, P House was taken into custody on charges of murder with the special circumstance of lying in wait, breaking and entering, and home burglary. He posted his $2 million bail and was released, then rearrested a couple of months later after entering a not guilty plea. P House's preliminary hearing date was originally set to take place in the summer of 2020, but after a series of delays and postponements, the proceedings were rescheduled for October the 25th of 2022. Number 6. Lorissa Schuster. In 2002, California couple Tim and Lorissa Schuster went through an acrimonious divorce process that involved fighting over the custody of their son Tyler, as well as the splitting of their joint assets. Lorissa was ultimately awarded primary custody of Tyler, while her estranged husband was forced to move into a condominium in Clovis. At some point during the summer of 2002, the woman allegedly told a friend of hers, "I want my husband dead. You don't understand. I could do it and get away with it." Her sinister remarks foreshadowed the events of July the 9th of 2003, when Lorissa and her co-worker, James Fagon, lured Tim from his condo before using chloroform and a stun gun to incapacitate him. The woman and her accomplice then disposed of the victim's unconscious body in a 55-gallon barrel filled with hydrochloric acid in an attempt to dissolve his remains. Despite their efforts to erase evidence of the crime, Lorissa immediately became the focus of Clovis Police's investigation into Tim's sudden disappearance. Investigators eventually interviewed Fagon, who openly revealed the grisly details of Tim's murder when pressed by detectives. Lorissa was arrested at St. Louis Airport while on vacation with her son. Both she and Fagon were charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder. Following their trials, they each received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Number 5. Patrick Morris Simmons. On the morning of March the 15th of 2022, Minnesota police were sent to a St. Paul shipping warehouse on the 1700 block of Wynn Avenue for a report of a woman on fire. Responding officers found 44-year-old Kelly Goodamont in critical condition after having sustained severe burns all over her body. Paramedics pronounced her dead at the scene a short time later. Investigators quickly identified the victim's ex-boyfriend as their prime suspect. 47-year-old Patrick Morris Simmons was located a short distance from his home in Bloomington, which had been set ablaze. He was initially arrested on arson charges, but then transported to the St. Paul Police Department as part of the homicide investigation into Goodamont's death. It subsequently emerged that the woman had been stabbed in the neck before being doused with gasoline and set alight by Simmons, who later called her a witch to detectives. He further indicated that he'd carried out the brutal attack on his ex to stand up for the babies being killed and sacrificed with witchcraft. Simmons also explained that he'd burned his own house down because there had been paranormal activity going on inside. In May of 2022, the man was found incompetent to stand trial for second-degree murder, and his next court hearing was scheduled for November. Number 4. Eric Bretz. In September of 2018, after posting a picture of herself in a black spaghetti-strapped tank top to Instagram, college student Melissa Gentz was viciously attacked by her socialite boyfriend. The 22-year-old woman, a Brazilian native, studying at the University of South Florida, was both verbally and physically abused over the photograph, which 25-year-old Eric Bretz considered to have been too revealing. After the man had become argumentative and jealous, he allegedly took Gens's cell phone, to which she responded by pushing him. Bretz then turned violent, throwing his girlfriend to the floor and strangling her with his legs before pulling out chunks of her hair and hitting her in the face with a bottle of wine. The victim eventually fled to the apartment building's lobby, where a doorman called the police. In the aftermath, Gens posted pictures of her bruised and battered face to Instagram with the caption, "I won't hide the marks of my story because no woman should feel ashamed or feel blamed for being a victim of domestic violence." Bretz, the son of one of Brazil's wealthiest families, was arrested on a charge of felony domestic battery by strangulation, to which he pleaded not guilty after his attorney indicated that he was eager to prove his innocence. He was released from custody on $60,000 bail, agreeing to a restraining order that prohibited him from making any form of contact with Gens. The following month, the latter released audio clips that she claimed had come from the night of their altercation. In the recordings, she could be heard crying while a man believed to be Bretz screamed, "Why are you so dumb?" and "You do not accept the man who has more dominance than you." As of recent updates, the case's legal proceedings hadn't yet reached a conclusion. Number 3. Brett Walker. At around midday on July the 9th of 2022, police were called to a home in Nowra on the south coast of New South Wales after receiving reports of a domestic violence incident. Upon their arrival, officers found 25-year-old Skye Cruikshank bleeding profusely from the neck, and she was then rushed to St. George Hospital, where her condition was stabilized. The woman had reportedly been viciously attacked by her abusive partner, 27-year-old Brett Walker, who was still brandishing a large knife when police came on the scene. He threatened the officers before charging towards them, at which point he was fatally shot by law enforcement. When paramedics arrived, they performed CPR on him, but he was ultimately pronounced dead a short time later. Cruikshank's brother-in-law also sustained minor injuries during the altercation after attempting to intervene on her behalf, and he was taken to Shoalhaven Hospital in the aftermath. It was reported that the woman was set to be discharged from the hospital a few days after the incident occurred. The ill-fated couple had initially gotten together the previous month, shortly after Walker had been released from prison in Victoria and moved to the Shoalhaven area. Number 2. Charlotte Dudson. Englishwoman Charlotte Dudson, a drug addict with a documented personality disorder, subjected her boyfriend to a harrowing campaign of domestic abuse over the course of their 4-year relationship. Between May of 2018 and July of 2021 alone, Manchester police received a total of 12 calls about Dudson, inflicting violence against Mohammed Mukhtar. She allegedly assaulted him on a regular basis, often using weapons such as knives, and had even caused him to be hospitalized twice. Although Dudson was arrested on 3 separate occasions, Mukhtar would either lie to protect the abusive woman or refuse to support a prosecution each time the authorities became involved. The couple's tempestuous relationship was brought to an appalling and violent conclusion. In August of 2021, 25-year-old Dudson reportedly bound her gentle and vulnerable partner to a sofa using electrical cables wrapped around his hands, feet, and neck. She proceeded to humiliate Mukhtar even further by sending a picture of him tied up to another would-be lover, which was followed by a slew of sadomasochistic messages. Hours later, Dudson called her father to tell him that Mukhtar was no longer breathing. He urged her to contact emergency medical services, but she refused and instead left the house. After the police conducted a welfare check on Mukhtar on August the 30th, they came upon his bound body and he was ultimately pronounced dead at the scene. Dudson was arrested shortly thereafter and later pleaded guilty to murder, for which she was jailed for life, with a minimum term of 22.5 years before she could be considered for conditional release. Number 1. Catherine Knight. In February of 2000, an Australian couple's already tumultuous relationship grew even more tenuous following a series of domestic assaults, which culminated with Catherine Knight stabbing her boyfriend, John Price, in the chest. The man consequently kicked Knight out of the house and took out a restraining order against her, seeking to keep her away from both him and his children. On February the 29th, Price reportedly told his co-workers that if he didn't come to work the following day, it would be because Knight had killed him. That night, the woman visited his house while he was sleeping and took a shower before waking him up to have intimate relations. A neighbor became concerned the next morning after seeing Price's car still in the driveway. The police were alerted when the neighbor found blood on the front door, and after breaking in through the back of the house, officers came upon Price's mutilated body as well as Knight, comatose from a large number of pills. The bloody scene was the reported aftermath of a gruesome killing carried out by Knight. During the course of the previous night, she'd stabbed her ex-boyfriend with a butcher knife, and although he attempted to escape, his wounds ultimately proved too severe and he bled out. Several hours later, the sadistic woman skinned, decapitated, and dismembered Price's remains before cooking parts of his body to serve alongside baked potato, pumpkin, beetroot, zucchini, cabbage, yellow squash, and gravy. Knight allegedly planned to serve the man's organs to his children the following night. The woman initially offered to plead guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter but was rejected. Despite refusing to accept responsibility for her actions, Knight ultimately pleaded guilty to murder and was consequently sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, the first Australian woman to receive such a punishment. Number 8. Nina Morano and Lisa Dykes. 23-year-old Maricela Botello Valadez disappeared on October the 5th of 2020 after traveling from Seattle to Texas to visit a friend. She'd gone out in Dallas's Deep Ellum Entertainment District and was last seen on surveillance video leaving a club in the company of a man whom the authorities identified as 30-year-old Charles Anthony Beltran. He lived in the same Mesquite home with married couple Nina Morano and Lisa Dykes. All three would later be charged with the murder of Botello Valadez, whose body was found in a wooded area of Wilmer roughly 5 months after she'd gone missing in March of 2021. The young woman had been stabbed to death before her remains were discarded. Detectives used cell phone records to determine that Botello Valadez was at the trio's home on the last date she was known to be alive. A search of the residence revealed blood stains beneath the carpet, which had recently been cleaned. The blood proved to be a match for the victim. Beltran remained in prison, but Morano and Dykes each posted the $500,000 bond for their release. At around Christmas in 2021, they both cut off their ankle monitors and fled Texas. The FBI, working in conjunction with international agencies, eventually tracked Morano and Dykes down to Cambodia. Local law enforcement took them into custody and they were brought back to the US 2 months after they had fled house arrest. Their new bond, as of June 2022, was set at $4 million. Number 7. Simone Gonzalez. In the spring of 2016, the parents of a California woman called the police on her after she'd smashed the window of their home with a brick and attempted to run them over in her Chevy Tahoe SUV. The incident, during which no injuries were reported, occurred in Pasadena, and 32-year-old Simone Gonzalez subsequently fled from responding law enforcement. She led them on a chase on the 101 freeway, during which she drove it up to 100 miles per hour. The police decided to abandon the pursuit and later caught up with Gonzalez outside the Lexington Comedy Club in downtown Los Angeles. By that point, a reporter from a local news outlet had already approached Gonzalez and started filming her. They asked why she'd attempted to flee justice, to which Gonzalez responded with a series of incoherent ramblings. Her utterances included calling the reporter a slave trader and accusing them of injecting her with an illegal substance, as well as claims that she was a member of the army, a police officer, and a firefighter. Then, as officers got close to her, Gonzalez started removing her clothes. She got completely naked and started screaming about being a victim of police brutality. The reporter's video, which was widely shared online in the aftermath, ended with officers placing handcuffs on the nude Gonzalez and then picking some of her clothes off the street. The woman, who had a history of mental health problems, was medically cleared and booked on a $75,000 bail at the Century Regional Detention Facility. Some of her felony charges included assault with a deadly weapon, evading, and reckless driving. Number 6. Gillain Maxwell. British socialite Gillain Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in prison for human trafficking and other related offences in the summer of 2022 in the aftermath of a highly publicised case also involving her late partner Jeffrey Epstein. Maxwell, who was alleged to have worked as a chief recruiter for Epstein in the 1990s, had her home in Bradford, New Hampshire, raided by the FBI on July the 2nd of 2020. Maxwell was reported to have exhibited troubling behavior during the raid. She ignored the agents' direction to open the door after they'd announced themselves as law enforcement and quickly fled to another room in the house, shutting the door behind her. As the agents conducted a search of the home, they found a cell phone wrapped in tin foil on a desk, which they determined had been a misguided effort on Maxwell's part to avoid being monitored by the authorities. A security guard at the $1 million home, nicknamed Tucked Away, told the FBI that Maxwell hadn't left the address and instead asked him to make purchases for the property. The agents described Maxwell's behavior as that of someone skilled at living in hiding and fleeing justice. That aspect, coupled with the fact that the disgraced socialite held 3 passports, was argued by prosecutors as a reason why Maxwell shouldn't be granted bail. Number 5. Christy Lynn Woods. Since 2011, Oregon woman Christy Lynn Woods had been arrested roughly 38 times, leading up to a 2018 incident involving an ambulance joyride. Of the over 100 charges on her extensive criminal record, most had been for harassment, criminal mischief, violating parole, and disorderly conduct. Jail records indicated that in mid-September of 2018, the Roseburg resident got into an unattended ambulance while the paramedics were busy trying to revive an unconscious woman. Woods then drove the emergency vehicle through downtown Roseburg before going on Interstate 5. She refused to stop for local law enforcement and led them on a 30-mile chase, reaching speeds of up to 85 miles per hour. She slammed into a police vehicle, causing major damage and minor injuries to a state police sergeant. The authorities used a spike trip to bring the ambulance to a halt and then took Woods into custody. According to an affidavit, as she was being transferred to Douglas County Corrections, the 37-year-old tried to shift the blame of her joyride on the paramedics by stating, "Why would they leave it unlocked?" Woods maintained her seemingly unaffected disposition in the latest of her numerous mugshots as she smiled into the camera. For her latest foray into crime, the woman was booked on 14 charges, including assault, interfering with paramedics, criminal mischief, and reckless driving. Number 4. Ain Holdsworth. An intoxicated woman engaged law enforcement in Hiram, Ohio in a chase in October of 2011 in which she pushed her vehicle to nearly 128 miles per hour, which was roughly 65 miles above the speed limit. The police had tried to stop Ain Holdsworth, who was in her late 20s at the time, for speeding, but she refused to obey their commands. Her vehicle was ultimately brought to a halt after officers had laid down stop sticks that forced the driver's side tires to deflate. As reported by Bainbridge Police Chief John Bokovitz, Holdsworth was barely able to stand up upon getting out of her car. Adding to the woman's disheveled appearance was the fact that she was only wearing a white thong and a fishnet top that was completely see-through. She was caught on dashcam video making her way to the police officers with her arms raised. Although initially reported as cooperative, further footage from the October the 11th arrest would show the handcuffed Holdsworth becoming aggressive and agitated in the back of the police cruiser. She started screaming and trying to break the vehicle's partition glass by kicking and bashing her head against it. Holdsworth was eventually jailed for 18 months after being convicted of operating a vehicle while intoxicated, driving with a suspended license, and fleeing and eluding. Number 3. Linda Roberts and Mary Beth Thomasi. On the morning of March the 6th of 2015, the emergency services were called to the Florida home of 85-year-old Anthony Thomasi, who was found dead by his daughters Linda and Mary Beth. The former claimed that she'd unsuccessfully tried to apply CPR and the death wasn't considered suspicious, considering the man's age and previous bout with cancer. Natural causes remained the official verdict for roughly 4 years. Then, in February of 2019, an unidentified man shared an illuminating recording with detectives of the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. The man, who had reportedly slept with both Linda and Mary Beth in the past, had recently broken off his relationship with the former, and afterwards they had a phone conversation that would bring light to Anthony's death. The woman claimed that she'd suffered greatly after her father's passing and was haunted by dreams of him in the room with her. As the conversation progressed, she told her ex that she couldn't take it anymore and confessed, "I killed my father." It was at that point that the man started recording. Linda went on to say that she'd perpetrated the murder together with Mary Beth. The confession, which ended the sisters' flight from justice, led to their arrest in March of 2019, and more details of what they later tried to portray as a mercy killing emerged. The women had wanted their father to move into assisted living from his Palm Harbor condo, but he was adamant about staying, so they concocted a plan to put him out of his misery. They first spiked his drink with what they thought would be a fatal dose of sleeping pills, but it didn't work. Linda then stuffed a washcloth in his mouth as Mary Beth held his nose shut to asphyxiate him, ending his life. They staged the scene to look like they tried to revive him, went to sleep, and called 911 in the morning. The sisters, both in their 60s when the crime was discovered, each took a plea deal. Linda was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while Mary Beth was sentenced to 15 years after offering to testify against her sister. Number 2. Victoria K Osterreich. Officers from the Waterloo Police Department in Iowa attempted a traffic stop in December of 2019 after identifying the driver of a vehicle as having an active arrest warrant. They tried to pull over 28-year-old Victoria K Osterreich in the area of Burton Avenue and Dawson Street, but she fled and a chase ensued. Osterreich eventually went off-road and drove through a field, crossing a homeowner's yard. She then continued eastward and struck a snow fence before crashing into a tree, rendering her vehicle disabled. Osterreich tried to flee on foot, but was apprehended, and the police also found an illegal substance in her car. She was subsequently taken to the Black Hawk County Jail on a no-bond hold and charged, among others, with felony eluding police, interference with official acts, and violation of parole. Number 1. Caitlyn Armstrong. Since mid-May of 2022, Texas yoga teacher Caitlyn Armstrong had been wanted by multiple agencies in the U.S. in connection to the killing of 25-year-old cyclist Anna Moriah Wilson. The latter had been staying with a friend in Austin for a race and was romantically linked to 34-year-old Armstrong's on-again, off-again boyfriend, Colin Strickland. He and Wilson had gone out on the day of her murder, while Armstrong, who'd become furious upon learning about their relationship months earlier, had been tracking their movements. She used the app Strava, which showed the routes of runners and cyclists. Shortly after Wilson had gone swimming with Strickland, she was found unresponsive at her friend's apartment after sustaining multiple gunshot wounds. Paramedics tried to apply CPR, but she was ultimately pronounced dead at the scene. Armstrong's black Jeep Cherokee had been spotted in the area and caught on surveillance footage around the time of the killing. She was briefly interviewed by detectives on May the 14th and reportedly claimed that it didn't look good when they pointed out she'd been seen near the victim's apartment. Armstrong was released pending further investigation and within days sold her SUV for $12,000 and fled the state. The move sparked a manhunt that extended through multiple U.S. states, including New York and New Jersey, before reaching its conclusion abroad in Costa Rica. Armstrong had reportedly traveled to the Central American country using her sister's passport. She called herself Ari during her stay at Don John's Lodge in the small town of Santa Teresa, where she took a job as a substitute yoga teacher and also worked the front desk. She'd cut her hair to shoulder length and dyed it brown to better resemble her sister Christine, and also had a nose job to further change her appearance. A receipt for the $6,350 operation was subsequently found in a locker that she used. Armstrong was taken into custody by local authorities as they were conducting a routine check of the Treehouse Hostel when her fake name didn't appear anywhere in their database. The arrest led to her discovery, and on July the 3rd of 2022, after 43 days on the run, she was extradited to the US to face murder charges. Number 7. Christopher Anderson. In September of 2021, Wisconsin man Christopher Anderson, aged 30, was apprehended in connection to the killing of his girlfriend, following a manhunt lasting several months. He and Hannah Miller from Rhinelander had been in a relationship for a number of years but had separated, leading up to the summer of that year. On June the 2nd, 26-year-old Miller had contacted local police to report that Anderson had taken her car and refused to give it back. She also expressed fears at the time that the man was going to kill her. Anderson had asked friend and housemate Seth Wakefield to conduct surveillance on Miller's apartment and let him know when she was home with the promise of payment for his help. He'd allegedly shared with him plans of killing his ex and then fleeing with their child. Miller's body was found along the side of a road in Oneida County on June the 30th. Anderson was suspected of having gunned her down, reportedly relying on information that Wakefield had provided him. A manhunt was launched for the suspected killer, during the course of which the police arrested Wakefield and charged him with first-degree intentional homicide with a party to a crime modifier. When asked why he hadn't contacted the police upon learning of the murder plot, he reportedly stated that it wasn't any of his business. Law enforcement acted on a tip from a confidential informant and eventually tracked Anderson down to Carroll Stream, Illinois, where he was taken into custody on charges of first-degree murder. In late December, he pleaded not guilty, and a trial date was set for August of 2022. Number 6. Heather Bamford and Diana DeVincenzo. In December of 2019, New Jersey woman Heather Bamford, aged 33, sent her daughter off to spend time at the Hackettstown home of her estranged husband, Dominic. The woman had previously gifted the child a stuffed Minnie Mouse toy. On December the 15th, Dominic picked up the toy and pressed its midsection, expecting it to speak its pre-assigned phrases. He then made a chilling discovery when what he heard back was his daughter's voice, as well as his own. Heather had planted a listening device in the toy to keep tabs on her husband. Dominic reported her to the authorities, who arrested the woman on a wiretap offense and harassment. The case mirrored one that had occurred over a decade prior in Omaha. At the time, Diana DeVincenzo and her husband William Luton were in the midst of a bitter custody battle. The woman had bugged her 5-year-old daughter's ever-present teddy bear in a misguided effort to secure evidence against her ex in a custody case. The man only became aware that he'd been monitored when DeVincenzo tried to use the recordings in court. Her plan backfired dramatically when a judge deemed the tapes inadmissible as they'd been illegally obtained. The reveal also prompted Luton to file a civil case against DeVincenzo, along with 5 co-plaintiffs that included his fiancée, neighbor, friends, and relatives, all of whom had also been secretly recorded. There were hours of conversation captured from December of 2007 to May of 2008. A few years later, DeVincenzo and her father were ordered to pay $20,000 to each of the plaintiffs for carrying out the illegal monitoring. Number 5. John Hare. A farmer from Seaham in County Durham, England, was jailed for 5.5 years at Newcastle Crown Court in the summer of 2022 after being convicted in the aftermath of an elaborate James Bond-type fantasy. 53-year-old John Hare, a married father, had lived a double life for several years while cheating on his wife. About 6 months into the relationship with this girlfriend, whose identity wasn't revealed, Hare told her that he was in the Secret Service. The man who ran a farm in County Durham claimed that he'd suddenly have to leave and carry out covert operations for the British government, when in reality he'd returned to his spouse. Whenever Hare went out with his paramour, he carried a prohibited .22 caliber pistol, which he'd bought online in the mid-2000s and kept hidden back at his farm in the chicken coop. He explained that he had to bring the gun along because he was afraid of being assassinated. The victim later described Hare as an expert manipulator and had only begun to suspect he wasn't being truthful about 3 years into their relationship. On New Year's Eve, she decided to contact the Secret Service phone number Hare had given her, only to hear the man's phone vibrate on the table. The farmer successfully made an excuse. The facade was definitively brought down after a confrontation at Hare's home in May of 2020. It was then that the man punched his girlfriend 3 times in the face, causing her nose to bleed and damaged her car wing mirror as she drove away. The woman called the police, who took Hare into custody and also retrieved his firearm after he'd confessed to possessing it. His web of lies had been so intricately constructed that for 2 years, as the victim waited for the case to go to trial, she lived in fear of reprisal from the Secret Service. She ultimately accepted that their relationship had been a lie when the man was put behind bars after being convicted of assault and criminal damage. Number 4. Stephen Hewitt. During a stalking campaign of several months against his estranged wife, British IT expert Stephen Hewitt was accused of planting listening devices to monitor her conversations and even hack it into foreign surveillance systems. In June of 2020, he'd moved out of the family home in Washington, Tynan Weir, after his 20-year-long marriage with 47-year-old Deborah had begun falling apart. Stephen had become convinced that the council housing manager was having an affair with a co-worker. After leaving the home in an attempt to win his wife back, Stephen started texting her about the shows she was watching. Deborah found his references oddly accurate, but only became concerned after he'd messaged her about a private conversation she'd had with a friend. The woman then contacted a tech-savvy acquaintance and found a listening device connected to a SIM card behind her TV unit. Deborah also discovered an iPhone linked to a battery in her car. Stephen accused her of having an affair outright, and then started following her about in his car and at her workplace. One of the most concerning incidents was when Stephen texted Deborah a screenshot of her and their 2 daughters, aged 17 and 22, while they were vacationing in Turkey. He'd asked one of their daughters to speak to him from a location which had CCTV, then hacked into the camera to capture the screenshot. The man eventually admitted stalking in court and was given a suspended sentence, along with a 3-year restraining order that involved electronic monitoring. Deborah denied ever having an affair, and speaking on the impact the stalking had had on her, noted that she'd become paranoid and was constantly looking over her shoulder. Number 3. X. In the spring of 2022, evidence came out that an unnamed MI5 agent had used his position in the intelligence community to monitor, control, and torment his girlfriend, codenamed as Beth. One of the most disturbing pieces of evidence in that regard was a publicly released clip of him threatening to kill the woman and attacking her with a machete. The agent, codenamed X in the British press, gradually revealed himself to be obsessed with cruelty and violence. Over the course of their relationship, aside from physically assaulting and abusing Beth, X psychologically tortured her and forced her to watch gruesome videos of public executions. He was also alleged to have spied on the woman and controlled virtually every aspect of her life. As reported by the BBC, the agent was arrested for the machete attack, but never charged after the alleged intervention of the intelligence service. The BBC demanded to know his identity, labeling him a clear danger to women, but the government reportedly took the corporation to court in order to block publication. Number 2. Stephen Brown. British man Stephen Brown was arrested under stalking laws in the spring of 2016, following accusations that he'd planted GPS trackers on the vehicles of his wife and the man with whom he suspected she was having an affair. 51-year-old Brown, the owner of a South London concrete firm, believed that his estranged wife Nicola was cheating on him with her friend firefighter Mark Compton. The affair was eventually confirmed by those familiar with the married couple's situation. In addition to the trackers, Brown hired 2 investigators to follow the pair and take pictures of them. He also threatened his spouse and her lover via text messages and calls over the 3-month stalking period, starting in November of 2015. Following his arrest, Brown pleaded guilty to stalking and, in addition to being handed a 3-year restraining order, he was sentenced to 16 weeks in prison, suspended for 2 years, in order to complete 200 hours of unpaid work. Number 1. Ross Cairns. British electronics expert Ross Cairns was jailed for 11 months in the summer of 2018 after his wife Catherine accused him of using their former matrimonial home to spy on her. Manchester's Mincehull Street Crown Court was told that through an app on his iPhone, the man had accessed their smart house in Hale targeting systems designed to control the home's lighting, heating, and security. He'd used a wall-mounted iPad in the kitchen to monitor Catherine's conversations shortly after their separation. In one exchange that the woman had had with her mother, she mentioned that she no longer loved Cairns. Shortly thereafter, the latter showed up on Catherine's doorstep, unannounced, and repeated fragments of the conversation she'd just had. The woman recounted feeling threatened by his erratic behavior, and as he'd walked inside and told their 2 children that he was moving back, she called the police, who asked Cairns to clear the premises, which he obliged. Additional reports of stalking and harassment included him spitting at his former partner's car and making a throat-slitting gesture towards her. Cairns was convicted of stalking, but it was dropped on appeal after a judge deemed that his actions couldn't be proven to a criminal degree and that the evidence had been compromised due to the number of devices discussed. However, by monitoring his wife, the man had been in breach of a previous suspended sentence for fraud and theft, an aspect that ultimately resulted in him being given jail time. Number 7. Matthew Joseph Medlin. On May the 12th of 2020, a 36-year-old man broke into a snack shack at a railway station in Portland, Oregon. The suspect, later identified as career criminal Matthew Joseph Medlin, was spotted by members of transit police, who immediately gave chase. Medlin fled into a nearby supermarket and hid himself in the stockroom, but was eventually tracked down and confronted by law enforcement. The man then concealed his hands underneath his jacket and threatened to shoot the officers, who ultimately neutralized him by firing their tasers at him. They subsequently brought the suspect into custody, whereupon they discovered that he hadn't in fact had a weapon in his possession at the time of the break-in, charged with burglary, criminal mischief, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. Medlin was booked into the Multnomah County Detention Center on a $16,500 bond. In the incident's aftermath, a series of mugshots from Medlin's past arrests surfaced online, with many commenting on the gradual devolution of his physical appearance, as he added tattoos and other markings to his face over time. Medlin's initial arrest reportedly occurred on his 18th birthday in 2002. At that time, he had no tattoos and was perceived as a normal-looking person, in stark contrast to his menacing appearance in his 2020 mugshot. Number 6. Dwayne Adrian Johnson. At about 5:30 p.m. on Christmas Day 2016, Washington, D.C. actress Trisha McCauley, who most notably appeared in the 2006 dance drama Step Up, got into her 2-door Toyota Scion to drive to a holiday party being held at a friend's house in the city. When the 46-year-old never showed up to the party, she was eventually reported missing, and the Metropolitan Police Department promptly set a widespread search effort into motion. Then shortly after 11 p.m. the following night, investigators found McCauley's car parked outside of a pharmacy. Upon entering the store, officers encountered 30-year-old career criminal Dwayne Adrian Johnson, who reportedly had the key to McCauley's vehicle in his pocket. The car was subsequently searched, at which point the actress's lifeless body was found in the back seat. Johnson, who also had the victim's credit cards in his possession, was arrested on suspicion of committing her murder. During the ensuing police investigation, it emerged that Johnson had forced his way into McCauley's car while she was driving to her friend's Christmas party. He then proceeded to assault the woman, after which the two became engaged in a physical struggle that resulted in her clothing being ripped and her nose fracturing. Johnson ultimately took the scarf McCauley had been wearing and used it to fatally strangle her. In September of 2017, the man pleaded guilty to first-degree felony murder, and he was consequently sentenced to a prison term of 30 years, which was ordered to be followed by 30 years of supervised release. Number 5. Terrell Rollins. On April the 23rd of 2020, a vehicle driven by Terrell Rollins was pulled over by the police in Plant City, Florida, for having excessively dark tint on its windows. 27-year-old Rollins subsequently fled the traffic stop, reportedly reaching speeds of up to 93 miles per hour as he attempted to escape through the nearby neighborhood. Although officers initially chased after the suspect, they ultimately called off their pursuit because of his erratic driving. Shortly thereafter, Rollins ran through a stop sign at a dangerously high velocity and plowed into a car being driven by 53-year-old Amanda Renee Holmes Williams. The latter, a Plant City grandmother who'd been going about her everyday life when the crash occurred, was reportedly killed on impact. Rollins ran from the scene of the accident without stopping to render aid to the victim. He was found hiding in the backyard of a nearby house later that day, and he was then taken into custody on a myriad of charges, including third-degree murder, fleeing and attempting to elude a police officer, and vehicular homicide. In February of 2022, Rollins was found guilty on each of the charges levied against him, resulting in a sentence of 30 years behind bars. It marked the third time he'd been sent to prison during his career as a criminal. Prison records indicated that Rollins had been incarcerated for aggravated battery and other offenses between March of 2015 and August of 2018. Number 4. Olivio D Lon. Career criminal Olivio D Lon was released from Massachusetts State Prison in early March of 2018 after serving as a cooperating witness for Plymouth County District Attorney Timothy Cruz. Then in October of that same year, the 31-year-old man became the target of surveillance by Brockton police, who'd received a tip that he was planning an armed home invasion along with 2 accomplices. At about 8:30 p.m. on October the 22nd, officers began watching a black BMW driven by Lon. They eventually conducted a motor vehicle stop, whereupon they found items stolen from a house that had been burglarized earlier that evening inside of Lon's car. The latter and his accomplices were arrested on charges of receiving stolen property, to which they each pleaded not guilty during their arraignments the following day. Lon resurfaced on the radar of New England law enforcement in February of 2021 when it was reported that he'd been involved in a deadly shooting outside of a car wash in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. The victim, named as Julius Bell, was found suffering from a critical gunshot wound to the head. He was rushed to a nearby hospital where he was ultimately pronounced dead a short time later. A preliminary investigation into the matter uncovered that the shooting had been precipitated by an argument between multiple people, although initial reports didn't specify whether Bell had been involved or had only been a bystander. Lon faced several additional charges in connection to the incident, including murder, conspiracy to commit assault with a dangerous weapon, discharging a firearm during a violent crime, and conspiracy to carry a pistol without a license. As of the latest available updates, the career criminal was still awaiting the commencement of his case's legal proceedings. Number 3. Desure Early. Shortly after 10 p.m. on April the 21st of 2017, a police officer was dispatched to a parking garage overlooking the Florida State University Collegetown apartment complex at 815 West Madison Street in Tallahassee. Upon his arrival, the officer reportedly found a male suspect performing lewd acts on himself near the garage's north guard wall. The man was ordered to put his hands up, but instead began walking away from the officer before urinating on the ground in between 2 parked vehicles. Upon his subsequent arrest, the suspect, identified as Desure Early, told the police that he'd gone to the garage to urinate because all of the nearby businesses had already closed for the night. In the wake of the incident, it was reported that while Early had been performing the lascivious acts at the garage, he'd been peering through the open window of a neighboring apartment, in which he could see a woman changing clothes. Early was consequently taken to Leon County Jail on charges of voyeurism and indecent exposure. The 34-year-old man's criminal history reportedly went back to the year 2000, when he was arrested in connection to armed burglary and kidnapping charges. Number 2. Alan Jett. The police in Cranston, Rhode Island, received reports of a series of break-ins at local businesses committed during the nighttime hours between January the 10th and January the 17th of 2022. According to subsequent reports, investigators quickly determined that the burglaries had been carried out by a single male suspect who had approached the businesses on a bicycle before gaining entry by smashing through their glass storefronts. After pilfering money from the cash registers, the man would flee back to his nearby residence prior to the arrival of police. Detectives ultimately identified the alleged thief as 64-year-old Alan Jett, a local resident with a lengthy criminal track record dating all the way back to 1979. The Cranston Police Department executed a search warrant of Jett's home, where they seized evidence linking him to a total of 6 break-ins. During their sweep of the residence, Jett reportedly became uncooperative and struck an officer in the face, at which point he was taken into custody. He faced several charges, including multiple counts of breaking and entering a business with the intent to commit a felony, as well as simple assault on a police detective. Prior to his 2022 arrest, Jett had most recently spent time in Rhode Island's adult correctional institutions after pleading no contest to charges of felony breaking and entering in May of 2005. Number 1. Ahmed Nash. New York City resident Christina Una Lee returned to her 6th-floor apartment on Christie Street in Chinatown in the early morning hours of February the 13th of 2022. As was captured by the building surveillance cameras, the 35-year-old woman, a creative producer for the online music platform Splice, was followed inside by a hooded man wearing a gray sweatshirt. Minutes later, a neighbor contacted the authorities after hearing Lee repeatedly shriek, "Help me! Call 911!" NYPD officers responded to the scene and came upon the suspect, Ahmed Nash, covered in blood. The 25-year-old man, later identified as a homeless career criminal, allegedly tried to flee by way of the fire escape before barricading himself in the apartment. The NYPD's emergency service unit ultimately forced their way inside, at which point they found Nash hiding under a bed. Officers also discovered a bloody knife that was determined to have been used to brutally attack Lee, who was found in her bathtub, bleeding from multiple wounds to the body. The homeowner was ultimately pronounced dead shortly before 6 a.m., roughly an hour and a half after she'd been first accosted by Nash, who was taken into custody on murder charges. It subsequently emerged that he had an extensive criminal rap sheet dating back to 2012 that included arrests for petty crimes and robbery, the latter of which investigators believe to have been the primary motive behind the deadly home invasion. Nash was reportedly scheduled to appear in court on July the 18th of 2022. Number 9. Willard Noble, Chayden Miller, and Jeremy Everett Goodale. Iowa teacher Nohema Grabber was reported missing to the authorities on December the 3rd of 2021. Originally from Mexico, the 66-year-old woman had been teaching Spanish at Fairfield High School for several years prior to her sudden disappearance. Later on December the 3rd, Grabber's lifeless body was discovered in a park that she was known to frequent. Her remains had been hidden underneath wheelbarrows, railroad ties, and a tarp, and her cause of death was subsequently determined to have been a traumatic brain injury. An autopsy revealed that Grabber had been viciously attacked with a blunt object, most likely a bat. During the ensuing police investigation, the authorities received a tip regarding disturbing content that had been posted online by Fairfield High students Jeremy Everett Goodale and Willard Noble Chayden Miller. Detectives executed a search warrant for the teens' houses, whereupon it was discovered that they'd been plotting to murder Grabber for some time before finally carrying out the heinous act. Blood-stained clothes found at Goodale and Miller's residences were taken in as evidence. The young men were ordered to stand trial separately, and in spite of their age, were treated as adults during the case's court proceedings. If found guilty, Goodale and Miller faced the likelihood of spending the rest of their lives in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 8. Raphael Theas. Furious with his professor's decision to schedule an exam at 7 a.m., Florida Atlantic University student Raphael Theas decided to vent his frustrations online. However, instead of merely ranting about the perceived injustice, the 20-year-old student tweeted a threatening message against his data structure teacher, identified as Carl Wiss. The tweet, which when edited for grammar read, "I'm going to kill my professor. This is my confession to a premeditated murder," was posted at 1 a.m. on November the 27th of 2018. By the following day, Thomasi's IP address had been tracked and he was arrested on charges of intimidation. While being interrogated, he admitted to having been upset by Wiss's decision to schedule an exam so early in the morning, as it meant he'd have to wake up at 5 a.m. in order to get to class on time. The student assured investigators that he'd never intended any real harm and had deleted the tweet soon after posting it, realizing that it was an inappropriate joke. Thomasi was released on bail and no further information had been released to the public as of recent updates. Number 7. Alisa Hatcher. Florida couple Tammy Hatcher and Michael Scheller contacted local authorities in the fall of 2019 after developing concerns about fraudulent transactions being made with their credit cards. When detectives started tracking the $1,400 that had been stolen, they discovered that it had been the victim's own daughter, student Alisa Hatcher, who was behind the financial fraud. Furthermore, it emerged that the young woman had been using the swindled funds to facilitate a murder-for-hire plot aimed at eliminating her parents. Alisa was arrested on September the 9th of 2019 and initially only charged with grand theft and fraud. As investigators questioned the suspect further, inquiring what she'd used the money for, she admitted to having spent $100 on illegal substances. The rest had reportedly been used to pay 2 of her friends to kill her parents. The first prospective hitman, who was given $400, didn't ultimately go through with it. Alisa then paid a second hitman more than double the original amount, in the hopes that it would serve as an encouragement for them to finish the job. 2 counts of criminal solicitation of murder were thus added to Alisa's charges. If convicted, she could reportedly face up to 30 years in prison. Number 6. Hannah Napka. Ohio student Hannah Napka accepted a plea deal with prosecutors in connection to the murder of 31-year-old Shay Breyer in order to avoid a harsher sentence. As part of the bargain, she acknowledged her participation in the violent crime by pleading guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter. Napka was consequently sentenced to 10 years in prison plus 7 more of probation. The young woman also agreed to testify against the other 2 women alleged to have participated in Breyer's killing on January the 12th of 2020. According to court records, Napka had been recruited by Esther Stephen and Shelby Heistand, her softball team coaches, to aid them in their sinister plot. Stephen and Breyer had reportedly been in the midst of a contentious custody battle at the time, and the former thus sought to have her estranged partner eliminated. Napka ultimately agreed to drive the car that would allow the 2 culprits to escape the scene of the crime undetected. On the night of the murder, Stephen distracted her ex-boyfriend, while Heistand, who was 18 at the time, approached from the back and shot down the victim with a rifle. The co-conspirators were each sentenced to 55 years behind bars. Number 5. Nicole Lee Bo. On October the 8th of 2012, 19-year-old New Orleans student Nicole Lee Bo attempted to carry out the murder of her own mother. On the night of the reported attack, Bova's stepfather frantically called 911 to inform dispatchers that his wife had been shot. The young woman had allegedly left the house and rushed back to the Louisiana State University campus in Baton Rouge after shooting her mother, who ultimately survived the attempted matricide. Bova was aided in her escape by fellow student Andrew Uhas. Together, the pair made their way back to campus, where they were arrested later that same day. Bova and Uhas were each charged with attempted murder, as well as possession of illegal substances, and were sentenced to 5 and 2 years of probation respectively. During the case's legal proceedings, Bova admitted to having tried to kill her mother in order to gain access to her inheritance, which she promised to share with Uhas. From 2015 to 2019, the young woman reportedly violated the terms of her probation several times, at one point spending a brief stint in a correctional institution. During a 2019 compliance check of Bova's apartment, authorities found her to be in possession of a loaded shotgun, a violation which could potentially add several years to her original sentence. Number 4. Chidinma Auku. On June the 23rd of 2021, undergraduate student Chidinma Auku was arrested for allegedly murdering Super TV CEO Yusufo Ataga. The 21-year-old suspect was remanded in jail for 30 days along with her sister, Quadri, while the homicide investigation got underway. Auku, a resident of Lagos, Nigeria, was interrogated by the police for several hours before finally admitting to stabbing the victim to death during a robbery on the night of June the 15th. Additional conspirators were arrested over the course of the days that followed, including Ojukwu's father, on charges that included obstruction of justice, failing to report a crime, and dishonestly receiving stolen items. Ojukwu's murder trial was delayed on several occasions. In March of 2022, she reportedly participated in a prison beauty pageant, during the course of which she successfully won over the crowd and earned the title of Miss Cell. Number 3. Avallone to Nique Fishback. Langston University student Avallone to Nique Fishback attempted to hire 4 different people to kill her former boyfriend between July and September of 2018. 20-year-old Fishback reportedly met at least 2 of the would-be assassins on the dating app Plenty of Fish. After receiving a tip about the murder plot, Oklahoma authorities arrested Fishback, who initially denied any wrongdoing. When shown screen caps of the conversation she had with the potential hitmen, she finally relented and confessed her misdeeds to investigators. The first man she'd been in contact with in July had requested $1,000 to carry out the crime, but Fishback backed out of the deal after discovering that he was facing prior criminal charges. A second agreement, this time for $600, was reached with another user on September the 28th. Fishback posted bond in January of the following year, pending the continuation of her case's legal proceedings. Number 2. Muhammad Ali. On February the 8th of 2020, 18-year-old student Muhammad Ali shot 2 of his friends in cold blood while they were driving from their hometown city of Alexandria toward Danville, both in the state of Virginia. Ali reportedly rode in the backseat with a concealed 9mm, while Joel Bianda, aged 21, and Ayanna Martins Griffin, aged 18, took turns driving, believing they were simply doing a favor for their friend. According to Ali's later confession, when they were only an hour away from their destination, he demanded Bianda pull over to the side of the road. He proceeded to shoot both of his friends before the car came to a complete stop. Ali then pushed the lifeless bodies out of the vehicle before continuing to his destination. Upon his arrival in Danville, he reportedly spent time with another friend, whom he asked for help in covering up the crime. The pair returned to the location of the bodies, at which point Ali stole the victims' cell phones, crashed the car into an embankment, and tossed the murder weapon into the woods. After going back to his normal routine, Ali began confessing the shooting to several friends over the course of the following days, which eventually caught the attention of the authorities. On December the 15th of 2021, having confessed to the murders but refused to provide an explanation for them, Ali was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. Number 1. Jonathan Martinez Garcia. Jonathan Martinez Garcia, a student at El Dorado High School in Las Vegas, launched a brutal attack on a female teacher on April the 7th of 2022. The teen had reportedly lured the unnamed instructor into a false sense of security by telling her that he wanted to meet simply to discuss his grades. Instead, Garcia wrapped a computer cord around her neck and strangled her until she fell unconscious. The teacher later detailed how she'd woken up during the attack, but Garcia grabbed her by the hair and slammed her head against a hard object, at which point she fainted again. She couldn't accurately tell investigators how long she was out the second time. After regaining consciousness once more, the teacher discovered that her pants and underwear had been pulled down, whereupon she decided to play dead. When Garcia finally decided to leave, he covered what he believed to be his victim's corpse with a cabinet. The police were alerted to the attack that same day and apprehended the student. Investigators recovered traces of the assailant's DNA on the victim's body, as well as defensive wounds on the student's arms. During questioning, he claimed to have been scratched by a car. When asked about the attack directly, Garcia initially claimed that he'd blacked out and couldn't remember what happened afterwards, but eventually admitted to having assaulted his teacher. Due to the severity of the crime, presiding Judge Kathleen Delaney decreed that Garcia would be tried as an adult. During the initial stages of his legal proceedings, the young man pleaded not guilty to his criminal charges. A video from an arrest on the US's southern border taken in January of 2022 showed an accused people smuggler growling and lunging towards officers. Immigrant smugglers are colloquially known as coyotes, and the arrested woman's behavior seemed to emulate that of the wild animal. A video of the incident was captured by an agent assigned to the Del Rio sector's Carrizo Springs station in Texas. After she was handcuffed and while she was being put in a van, the unnamed woman refused to respond to Border Patrol officers' commands. She blankly stared at the ground, ignoring requests to put her feet in the vehicle. She then let out a loud noise, growled, and lunged at law enforcement. She continued making animal noises as officers tried to press the door on her, fearing that she would try to flee. It was only after law enforcement warned her she'd be shot with a taser that the smuggler gave the first hint of compliance by stating that she didn't understand what they were telling her. Number 6. Jessica Vega. 35-year-old Texas woman Jessica Vega tried to kidnap a young girl from a San Antonio Walmart in early September of 2022. She pushed the child's older sibling's hands off the shopping cart and began to walk away while the toddler was still in the child's seat. Their 28-year-old mother, who wasn't named, went after Vega as she was walking away with her daughter, but the latter refused to return the child. She allegedly told the mother, "Just because she's yours doesn't mean I can't take her." Witnesses and store staff successfully intervened, and Vega fled on foot but was later arrested on a charge of attempted kidnapping. In the incident's aftermath, Vega's ex-husband, Michael O'Connell, talked to the media and described the woman as a sick, twisted individual, revealing the physical and psychological torment she'd put him through. After the birth of their daughter in the late 2000s, Vega became more paranoid and violent. She constantly accused O'Connell of cheating and, in various incidents, physically attacked him. O'Connell reported that in one case, Vega badly beat herself up, trying to get him arrested for domestic violence, and he woke up with 9 officers pointing their guns at him. They moved past the incident when Vega became pregnant for a second time and told O'Connell he was the father, which a DNA test later disproved. Still, he decided to remain in the child's life. Then in 2010, Vega claimed she was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and O'Connell felt he could no longer walk away from the relationship. They got married and went on a Caribbean honeymoon using the bulk of the $13,000 in donations that people had sent in for Vega's treatment. 3 months later, O'Connell learned that Vega had lied about the disease and ended their marriage. The woman went on to be indicted on charges of fraud and grand larceny. O'Connell revealed that she painted him as a monster during the custody battle for their daughter and was eventually granted full rights. Then, whenever the man wanted to visit his child, Vega would make him have intercourse with her first. Eventually, Vega's mother was given temporary emergency custody of her children. Her pre-trial hearing on the attempted kidnapping charge was set for October of 2022. Number 5. Andrew Abdullah. On May the 22nd of 2022, New York City man Daniel Enriquez was on his way to brunch on a Manhattan-bound Q train. The 48-year-old Goldman Sachs employee was on the last car where another man, Andrew Abdullah, was pacing back and forth and mumbling to himself. As later reported by the authorities, the only discernible words that 25-year-old Abdullah was heard saying was "no phones." He then walked up to Enriquez, a complete stranger to him, and shot him once in the chest at point-blank range. The police arrested the suspect at the Legal Aid Society offices in Manhattan, while his surrender to Mayor Eric Adams was being negotiated. Taking part in the talks on behalf of Abdullah was the mayor's longtime friend, Lamore M. Whitehead, a controversial Brooklyn bishop known for flaunting his luxurious lifestyle. He and Abdullah's lawyers later complained that he'd been arrested during negotiations, claiming he'd been ambushed by the NYPD. Abdullah had been on the run since the shooting and the subject of a citywide manhunt. He was reported to be suffering from mental health issues and allegedly didn't remember killing Enriquez, while his criminal record showed he'd been arrested 19 times since 2015. Number 4. Jeremy Garnier. In 2020, Facebook Live users stumbled upon the video of a man dressed up as a Batman villain, threatening to go out in public and kill people until his stream reached 1,000 watchers. In between puffs from a glass bong, Missouri man Jeremy Garnier expressed an intention to take over the world while wearing makeup and clothes, emulating the Joker. The 48-year-old, a prolific battle rapper with a small online following, then took his act on the road. He posed for photos and freestyle rapped at the St. Louis Mall before going to the Del Mar Loop, an arts and restaurant area in the city's northeast. He ordered a Sprite at the Blueberry Hills bar, claiming that he couldn't be intoxicated while intending to kill a bunch of people, all the while checking in with his viewership. Garnier told them that the reason he'd captured their attention was part of an effort to end the opioid epidemic plaguing U.S. society, describing it as the leading killer in people under 50 years of age. However, he then went on to reaffirm an intention of killing people. The police, who'd become aware of his deranged stream, arrived at the establishment and placed Garnier in handcuffs, charging him with one felony count of making threats and labeling him a danger to the community. His booking photo showed the man still wearing his makeup while displaying a wide smile, while some insisted that he was merely playing a character for attention and even expressed support for the former addict's mission of fighting the opioid crisis. Others were unnerved by his threats and frightening appearance. Number 3. Rachelle Waterman. 48-year-old Alaska woman Lori Waterman went missing in November of 2004, and her remains were subsequently found in a minivan that had been abandoned in the woods and set on fire. The investigation that followed revealed that Lori had been killed before being placed in the vehicle, in an attempt to disguise her murder as a car accident. Suspicions fell on the woman's teenage daughter, Rachelle, who ran a blog called My Crappy Life, chronicling numerous conflicts between her and Lori. Some of them stemmed from Rachelle's feelings of isolation in the small town of Craig, while others were focused on the male company she kept and recent interests in the pagan religion of Wicca. Rachelle had 2 friends, Jason Arant and Brian Riddell, both of whom she'd dated and with whom she'd shared stories about her mother abusing her in the household. They became concerned for the teenager's safety, and Rachelle led them to believe that she wanted her mother dead. Arant and Riddell were longtime friends and had reportedly once made a blood oath to help each other if needed. When Rachelle and her father were out of town, they kidnapped Lori and forced her to drink wine so that her death would look like a drunk drive-in accident. Once they were in the woods, Riddell fatally suffocated Lori before he and Arant set her vehicle ablaze. The 2 men broke during interrogation and confessed their involvement in the woman's killing. Both eventually pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, for which Riddell was sentenced to 99 years in prison, with release for good behavior possible in 33 years, while Arant was given 50 years with parole available after 16. The duo also testified against Rachelle during her legal proceedings, which eventually resulted in a mistrial. Rachelle was tried once again and sentenced to 3 years in prison in 2011 after being found guilty of criminally negligent homicide. Number 2. Gary Cabana. The New York Police Department released disturbing footage in March of 2022 showing a deranged man stabbing 2 workers at the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan. The suspect, identified as 60-year-old Gary Cabana, was reportedly angry that his membership had been revoked following 2 previous incidents of disorderly conduct. When he showed up for a movie screening at around 4 p.m., he was denied entry. In an attack captured by surveillance cameras, Cabana took out a knife and jumped over the reception desk. He cornered 2 terrified employees and started stabbing them. Another worker managed to distract Cabana by throwing a large binder at him, giving the others a chance to escape. The museum was temporarily closed as the authorities believed Cabana was still inside, but surveillance footage later showed him leaving the building. The deranged man's attack had left a 24-year-old woman with knife wounds to her neck and back, while a man also aged 24 was stabbed in the collarbone. They were rushed to the hospital, but their injuries weren't deemed life-threatening. In the aftermath, a user writing as Cabana continued posting to Facebook ramblings about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and that he suffered from bipolar disorder. Some posts claimed there was a conspiracy to ban him from the museum, referring to it as a backstabbing, and then referencing Cabana's spree, claiming, "I don't backstab, I do the front side only." After the incident, Cabana checked into a hotel in Philadelphia under his real name, where he intentionally set fire to one of the rooms. Patrols were ramped up in the city, and officers eventually found Cabana sleeping on a bench at a Greyhound bus station, where they arrested him without incident. Number 1. Ethan Blair Miller. On August the 28th of 2022, Ethan Blair Miller opened fire at a grocery store in Bend, Oregon, killing 2 people and injuring 2 others before turning the gun on himself. The 20-year-old, armed with a shotgun and an AR-15 style rifle, fired into his own Ford F-250 vehicle and then into the parking lot of a Costco. While walking towards the Forum Shopping Center, he reached the west entrance of the Safeway grocery store at around 7:04 p.m., where he gunned down 84-year-old customer Glenn Edward Bennett. Miller moved further into the store, firing his weapons through the aisles as he went. When he reached the produce section, he was stabbed by 66-year-old employee Donald Ray Surratt. He'd been hiding and charged the gunman with a produce knife, trying to disarm him, but was ultimately overpowered and shot dead. Surratt's heroic intervention, as later reported by the authorities, likely prevented further loss of life. Officers responding to a 911 call entered the store from the front and the back. They found Miller dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at 7:08 p.m. Minutes after his spree had begun, 3 Molotov cocktails and a sawed-off shotgun were subsequently recovered from his vehicle. In the months leading up to the mass shooting, Miller had written a manifesto on Wattpad entitled The Downward Spiral of Ethan Miller, a title inspired by the name of a 9 Inch Nails album. He'd written about causing a national tragedy and pondered shooting up his former high school. However, as a former employee of Safeway, he decided on the store, as he no longer wanted to wait for school to begin. Miller cited loneliness and isolation as the reasons for his murderous intentions, writing about the impact of COVID lockdowns, feuds with his family, and the inability of finding a girlfriend. Miller claimed that he wanted to die and leave a violent mark on the world, stating, "I am responsible for this, but I was turned into a monster." On July the 17th of 2018, law enforcement on Hawaii's Big Island conducted a traffic stop on a vehicle operated by 33-year-old Justin Waiki, who was wanted on an outstanding no-bail warrant. Waiki came out shooting, striking Officer Bronson Kaimana Kaliloa in the neck and leg. Other officers returned fire, but Waiki fled into the brush and was able to evade arrest, triggering an island-wide manhunt. 46-year-old Kaliloa was rushed to a hospital and went into surgery, but ultimately succumbed to his gunshot wounds. He was a married father of 3 and 10-year veteran of the force, who in 2014 had been named Officer of the Year. A few days after the fatal shooting, officers stopped an SUV at a checkpoint in South Point. Its passengers were Malaya Lajala, Jorge Pagan Torres, and Crystal Ferrer. When officers went to check the back of the vehicle, they found Waiki, who'd been hiding under a blanket with a woman subsequently named as 36-year-old Jamie Jason. A fire exchange ensued, during which Waiki shot and wounded Sergeant Brian Tina, who was later treated and recovered. Waiki was ultimately shot dead in the gunfight, while Jason suffered a non-fatal injury. The SUV's remaining passengers were taken into custody and initially charged with being accomplices to first-degree attempted murder. However, they were eventually found guilty on lesser charges for helping the cop killer evade apprehension. During the trials that followed, Jason was imprisoned for 6 years following a plea deal in which she admitted hindering prosecution, assault of a law enforcement officer, and accomplice to ownership or possession of a firearm when prohibited. Ferreira and Pagan Torres were sentenced to a year in prison after being found guilty of second-degree reckless endangering. Malaya Lajala had a criminal record of 14 convictions, 2 of which were felonies for robbery and attempted burglary. For her role in Waiki's flight from justice and the ensuing shootout, she was given consecutive sentences of 5 years for first-degree hindering prosecution and 1 year for second-degree assault on a law enforcement officer. Number 6. Cesar Echeverri. Cesar Eshi Echeverri, a 29-year-old detective with Florida's Miami-Dade Police Department, was part of the agency's Robbery Intervention Detail, or RID. The squad was active in areas prone to crime and as such, often dealt with dangerous suspects. Echeverri and other detectives in his team were at Northwest 62nd Street and 17th Avenue in August of 2022 when they saw a white sedan reported to have been involved in a recent armed robbery. The driver, 32-year-old Jeremy Willie Horton, tried to drive off, striking civilian and police cars. As the vehicle pursuit eventually turned into a foot chase, a gun battle erupted. Horton fired a round that struck Echeverri in the head before he was shot dead by the officer's colleagues. A Georgia native, Horton had been staying at the Extended Stay America Hotel in Miami Springs and had previously carried out a gas station robbery with an accomplice. The gunshot he'd sustained left Echeverri fighting for his life at Jackson Memorial Hospital's Ryder Trauma Center. Dozens of officers gathered in support, and on August the 17th, at the Miami Marlins game, the team dedicated a jersey with the number 9 etched with Echeverri's name on the back. Early the following day, Echeverri succumbed to his injuries. Horton's accomplice, who wasn't named, was tracked down to the Extended Stay America Hotel. It was there that deputies from the Broward County Sheriff's Office executed a search warrant with the assistance of Miami-Dade police detectives. A confrontation ensued during which the suspect was reportedly armed with an AK-47 style rifle. No officers were injured, but he was shot dead. Number 5. Houston Tippin. LAPD officer Houston Tippin was taking part in a bicycle patrol training exercise on May the 26th of 2022 at the department's Elysian Park Academy. The official account on the events of the day was that the 32-year-old, a bike instructor for the department, was role-playing as an uncooperative suspect and charged a colleague, only identified as Officer M. As they grappled, Tippin was reportedly dropped on his head by the trainee. He suffered a devastating spinal cord injury, went into cardiac arrest and died 3 days later, never having regained consciousness. The position of the LAPD was that his passing had been a tragic accident, witnessed by over a dozen officers, but of which there was no video or audio recording. The county's medical examiner supported the notion that it had indeed been an accident. In the aftermath, Tippin's mother filed a wrongful death suit against the city. It claimed that Tippin's colleagues had used the training exercise as a cover-up to kill him for his whistleblowing activities. In July of 2021, he'd started investigating the report of a woman who claimed that she'd been gang assaulted and abused by 4 LAPD officers. The victim identified them by the names on their tags. Tippin followed up on the accusation and was reportedly on the verge of revealing damning evidence. At least one of the officers named in the abuse case was believed to have been present during the fatal training exercise. Bradley Gage, an attorney working for Tippin's family, told the media that UCLA medical experts who'd reviewed his autopsy report agreed that it didn't correspond to the official version of events. The officer had suffered broken ribs, a lacerated liver, and 6 staples in his head. All of the injuries were officially explained as a consequence of the initial accident and the subsequent attempts to resuscitate him. A Lucas device, which works as an automatic CPR machine, was in the training room at the time, and it would have explained the broken ribs, but Gage found that it was never used. As per the attorney's findings, the LAPD tried to explain the perforated liver as a consequence of the broken ribs, but the fractures had actually occurred on the opposite side. The injuries suggested that the 5-year police force veteran had been subjected to a prolonged mob attack and had not been the victim of an ill-fated one-on-one drill. Updates from the fall of 2022 indicated that Gage had called upon the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office to launch an independent investigation into the matter. Number 4. Felix Calata. 31-year-old David Romrell was a rookie with the South Salt Lake Police Department who became his first officer to die in the line of duty in November of 2018. Romrell and another officer headed to the scene of a reported burglary at an industrial business on Southwest Temple Street. They came upon 2 men trying to drive away, at which point the officers got out of their cruisers and ordered them to stop. The driver, 32-year-old Felix Calata, then accelerated directly towards Romrell. The latter and his partner opened fire on him, with the shooting later subjected to an investigation carried out by a separate agency. While under gunfire, Kalata intentionally rammed his vehicle into Romrel, inflicting critical injuries to which the officer succumbed at the Intermountain Medical Center in Murray. The Marine Corps veteran was survived by a wife and 4-month-old son. Kalata had sped away from the scene, but he was later found dead from a gunshot wound. Number 3. Nicholas Brutcher. In October of 2022, the police in Bristol, Connecticut, received a 911 call about a domestic disturbance and went to the residence of 35-year-old Nicholas Brutcher. As soon as they arrived, the latter opened fire on them with an AR-15 style assault rifle. Brutcher would unload over 80 shots at the unsuspecting officers, and it would later be revealed that he'd placed the 911 call to lure them into an ambush. Sergeant Dustin DeMonte and Officer Alex Hamzy, aged 35 and 34 respectively, were both killed in the shootout. A third officer, Alec Iorato, was shot in the leg but managed to take cover behind a squad car as gunshots continuously rang out. One witness would compare the scene to an active war zone. As shown in his body cam footage, Iorato desperately asked for support as screams could be heard in the background. The 26-year-old policeman then took aim at Brutcher from the vantage point and shot him dead. Brutcher's brother, Nathaniel, was non-fatally shot in both legs during the altercation, but it wasn't disclosed if he'd been an accomplice in his brother's rampage, a bystander, or a victim. Brutcher's motive was also a mystery and became the focus of a complex investigation. He and the police had crossed paths earlier in the night when he was thrown out of a local bar, and there was speculation that he'd sought retaliation. Hamzy, one of the slain officers, was friends with Brutcher on Facebook, but the extent of their relationship remained unclear. Those who knew Brutcher described the divorced father as a man-child who was rowdy and constantly under the influence. He was also a gun enthusiast who often proudly displayed his weapons on social media. Number 2. Emily Petronella. Law enforcement in Chicago went to the Humboldt Park home of teenager Emily Petronella on March the 9th of 2019 to serve a search warrant. The 19-year-old, once part of the Marine Corps Junior ROTC program at the Marine Leadership Academy, had been arrested several times in the past on drugs and weapons charges. The most recent arrest had occurred in February when, during a traffic stop, the police had found a pump-action shotgun in her car. The warrant was for suspicion of narcotics and illegal weapons possession. Officers had loudly announced themselves and had stationed squad cars at the front and back of the building with their emergency lights activated. Law enforcement then attempted to take the back door down using a battering ram. After several strikes, Petronella fired one shot through the door. The 34-year-old officer at the front of the breach team, who was not named, was hit in the shoulder. The bullet shattered his vertebrae before it became lodged in his shoulder muscle. But the officer, who'd served in the Marine Corps for 8 years, was later reported to be recovering. Petronella was taken into custody without further incident. From her home, officers recovered a gun, large bundles of cash, and several pounds of marijuana. The charges from the incident included 5 counts of attempted first-degree murder, armed violence, and aggravated assault of a peace officer with a weapon. The police would argue that she'd knowingly and intentionally shot through the door, while Petronella maintained that she'd thought her home was being broken into by a robber. Her case was ongoing, and according to updates from 2021, she'd been released with electronic monitoring. Number 1. Gavin Eugene Long. On July the 17th of 2016, officers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, responded to reports that a man was walking with an assault rifle in the area of Hammond Air Plaza. Due to the state's open carry laws at the time, they had no probable cause to arrest the suspect and only intended to question him. Law enforcement came upon U.S. Marine Corps veteran Gavin Eugene Long, who was armed, clad in black and wearing a face mask. Within minutes, a shootout erupted near the Hair Crown Beauty Supply store. Armed with an IWI Tavor SAR assault rifle and a Springfield Armory XD 9mm pistol, Long gunned down 3 police officers in rapid succession during what was later determined to have been an ambush attack. The former soldier's rampage, which he carried out on his 29th birthday, lasted less than 10 minutes. He wounded 3 other police officers before he was fatally shot from 100 yards away by a member of the responding SWAT team. By that point, Long had suffered multiple other gunshot wounds from the firefight with law enforcement. His deceased victims were identified as Deputy Bradford Allen Garafola of the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office, as well as Corporal Montrell Lyle Jackson and Officer Matthew Lane Gerald of the Baton Rouge Police Department. The latter was a fellow Marine who'd been with the force for 4 months. 46-year-old Nicholas Tuller of the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office was wounded in the head, abdomen, and arm. He died from injuries suffered in the shootout in May of 2022. Long followed the Black separatism and sovereign citizen movements. The Missouri native had traveled 700 miles in a rental car to Baton Rouge to deliberately shoot police officers, partly motivated by the recent police killing of Alton Sterling. Long's mental health was reported to have been affected by his time in the military, which included a deployment to Iraq in the late 2000s. In a series of YouTube clips, he advocated violence against the police as a form of justice in the context of its oppression of the black community. Roughly 2 weeks before the incident, he claimed that peaceful protesting was essentially meaningless and supported fighting back through bloodshed. In the hour leading up to the shooting, he emailed a 3-page manifesto to a YouTube user in which he expressed the belief that the shooting was necessary to create substantial change within America's police force. In August of 2016, surveillance footage from a gas station in Gainesville, Florida, showed a black pickup truck and silver sedan pulling up after an argument in traffic. The pickup's driver, Jacob Sylvester, emerged from the vehicle and got into an unspecified altercation with the other motorist. As the situation spiraled out of control, 2 women exited Sylvester's pickup. One of them was holding a handgun, which she pointed at another driver and waved around while yelling at him. Sylvester intervened and promptly wrestled the weapon from his companion's hands. He was arrested on charges of assault and battery, but refused to give up the identity of the gun-toting woman. Nevertheless, 2 weeks later, police were able to identify and arrest Casey May Adkins, 26, of Weehawken, a tiny town in Florida's Gulf County. Number 10. Gina DeMarco. During rush hour traffic on July the 30th of 2016, Las Vegas woman Gina DeMarco collided with driver Adrian Rodriguez along US 95 at the Flamingo Road off-ramp in Nevada. 32-year-old DeMarco emerged from the vehicle and began cursing at the other driver, who had begun recording her on his cell phone. At some point during her tirade, the woman lifted up her hoodie and pulled down her sports bra, exposing her bare chest to Rodriguez and his family inside the vehicle. Minutes later, she drove away. DeMarco surrendered to the Nevada Highway Patrol less than a week after the video was taken. Her charges included indecent or obscene exposure in front of a child under the age of 18, a felony, in addition to failing to stop at the scene of an accident and failing to report an accident. There were also 2 fraud charges associated with DeMarco having been behind the wheel, one of which was the felony of using another person's ID for an unlawful purpose. According to law enforcement, had she not exposed herself and remained at the scene, the woman would have only received an unsafe lane change ticket. Number 9. Shania Faith Cofield and Peter Allen McLaren. A Florida couple were arrested in the spring of 2023 following a violent road rage incident at the intersection of US 301 and Martin Luther King Boulevard in Tampa. The video recorded confrontation involved Shania Faith Cofield and Peter Allen McLaren, who were enraged at a 31-year-old woman behind the wheel of a Chevy sedan. Cofield emerged from her vehicle and approached the Chevy's driver's side with a pistol in hand. McLaren took the weapon from her and, in the moments that followed, used it to try and break one of the Chevy's rear windows while screaming at the driver to get out of the car. Simultaneously, Cofield threw several forceful punches into the driver's side window. The woman then climbed on the Chevy's hood and stomped on its windshield. As reported by the witness who'd captured a video of the altercation, the Chevy driver had struck the couple's car and then attempted to drive away. The witness urged the couple to call the police on the woman instead of destroying her vehicle. Cofield and McLaren fled the scene but were eventually both arrested on multiple felony charges. Number 8. Jaime Yun. Shortly before 11:30 p.m. on June the 8th of 2023, Dr. Jaime Yun got into a verbal dispute with 31-year-old Dexter Alexander near Schenectady and East New York Avenues in Brooklyn, New York City. A physical struggle ensued and it culminated with Alexander punching Yun in the face. The 56-year-old cardiothoracic surgeon dropped to the pavement and hit his head. He was reported as being conscious and alert when law enforcement arrived at the scene. His condition deteriorated after he was taken to Kings County Hospital, where he ultimately succumbed to a traumatic brain injury on June the 16th. Yun was survived by a wife and 2 children. Alexander was initially arrested on charges of assault in the 3rd degree and menacing in the 3rd degree. He pleaded not guilty during a subsequent arraignment, and his next court date was set for July. Number 7. Ashley Barkis. Social media influencer and content creator Ashley Barkis was involved in a road rage altercation with several members of an Asian family in May of 2023. A video of the incident would show Barkis and 4 other people as they were arguing next to a grey SUV and a white minivan between which a minor fender bender had reportedly occurred. Barkis started hurling abuse at one of the male family members, yelling at him that he hit her car and asking if he was legally allowed to be in the US. The man pulled out his license and waved it in Barkis' face. The woman slapped it out of his hands and struck him in the back of the head as he bent down to pick it up. Barkis then attacked the rest of the family when they intervened, pushing one member and striking 2 others in the head. Refocusing her attention on the driver who'd started filming her in the meantime, Barkis hit his cell phone, which fell to the ground. When the man tried to retrieve it, the influencer pushed him into oncoming traffic, only a few feet away from a passing car. A video of the confrontation stitched together from multiple angles and with photos of the injuries sustained by the family members subsequently went viral on TikTok. Barkis took to Instagram in the aftermath to apologize for her behavior towards the family and for the racist comments, adding that she was half Filipino and that the way she'd acted on the day didn't reflect who she really was. Netizens reacting to the apology video described it as disingenuous, and that Barkis was only using her heritage as a way of downplaying the attack and her racist tirade. Some call for her to be charged with attempted murder for pushing the man into traffic. The apology video was subsequently taken down and Barkis went on a hiatus from social media. It wasn't clear if she was criminally charged for the altercation. Number 6. Karen Escamilla. While driving through Thornton, Colorado, on October the 11th of 2019, Karen Escamilla got into a traffic dispute with an unnamed male teenager. During the course of the argument, the teenager brandished a gun and shot 20-year-old Escamilla in the face. The bullet went through the young woman's cheek, breaking her jaw in 7 places and got lodged in her sinuses. She was rushed to an intensive care unit where doctors mended the entrance wound and wired her mouth shut. Escamilla gave an update on her condition through a social media post on October the 25th. She revealed that she'd lost the bone and palate inside her mouth as well as the bone beneath her nose. The latter complication reportedly meant that whatever she ate came out of her nose. Her bottom jaw had been left intact, but the damage to the upper part had left the young woman unable to speak or chew. A GoFundMe was set up to help her with her surgeries, one of which would involve transferring bone from her leg to reconstruct her jaw. The teenager who'd shot her was arrested on multiple charges, including attempted murder. Number 5. Incident in Mexico City. In late 2018, 2 women, one of whom was in a minivan and the other in a Volkswagen convertible, got into a minor traffic accident in Mexico City. In the moments that followed, the woman in the minivan, who wore a t-shirt that read, "Nice is the new cool," retrieved a metal pole from her vehicle. A bystander recorded her as she then began striking the convertible's windshield and mirror, shattering both as the woman's violent outburst unfolded. The driver in the other car got out but didn't confront her. The enraged woman then returned to her minivan and proceeded to drive into the Volkswagen's side, damaging her own car in the process. She reversed and smashed her vehicle into the Volkswagen a total of 4 times as onlookers shouted at her to stop before she fled the scene. Local police opened an investigation and subsequent updates on the matter indicated that the assailant's tags weren't registered to the car she'd been seen driving in the video, but to a 1998 Chevrolet Monza. Number 4. Alexa Danella. In May of 2022, Alexa Danella was driving home from Walmart in Providence, Rhode Island, when she used her horn on a man who'd cut her off. The second driver, who was identified as 23-year-old Zariel Olivo, then started tailgating Danella. They both pulled over in North Providence, at which point Olivo got out of his vehicle with a sword in hand and tried to open the driver's side door. Danella, who was in the car with her boyfriend, later told a media outlet, "I could see him like foaming at the mouth, telling us to get out of the car." Danella also noted that there was a female passenger in Olivo's car whom she hoped would intervene and calm him down, but she quickly realized the woman couldn't care less. Olivo and his passenger drove off upon noticing that Danella's boyfriend was taking photos of them. In the aftermath, Olivo was arrested and arraigned on assault as well as disorderly conduct and weapons counts. Number 3. Avery Tomasco. Avery Tomasco, an Emmy Award-winning meteorologist from Austin, Texas, was driving on Mopac at Steck when a Toyota Prius abruptly swerved into his lane in late June of 2023. As Tomasco later reported, he applied the brakes and used the horn, but it was too late and the two vehicles clashed. The minor collision was captured on Tomasco's dashboard camera. The Prius driver kept going, but the meteorologist got his attention and they eventually pulled into the shopping center at Capital of Texas Highway and 183. Tomasco and the other man got out of their cars and the former started taking photos of the damage. The driver accused Tomasco of hitting his car, to which he replied, "No, you hit my car." The Prius driver walked towards Tomasco and without warning swung at him with force. Fortunately, Tomasco managed to avoid taking the brunt of the hit and it only glanced him. After the sucker punch, as the meteorologist described it, both men went out of the dashcam's view and Tomasco called for help. At that point, his attacker walked away and returned to his vehicle. Police arrived at the scene and the victim gave them a copy of the video. They subsequently put out a warrant for the Prius driver's arrest, and in a social media post about the altercation, Tomasco stated an intention of pressing charges while also advocating for the usefulness of dashcams. Number 2. Daniel Bosquez. 36-year-old New York man Daniel Bosquez was arrested in April of 2018 for attacking another driver's car with a baseball bat. After an unspecified traffic dispute on the New York State Thruway, Bosquez and the other man pulled over on I-87 in the town of Ramapo. The latter recorded Bosquez as he smashed the driver's side window and the mirror of his Subaru. The victim kept filming Bosquez as he seemingly geared up to strike him as well. The Subaru driver asked, "Are you going to attack me?" and then repeated the question, "What did I do to you?" Bosquez returned to his vehicle, a maroon Nissan, and the victim continued filming, capturing his license plate. He then aimed the camera at the assailant's female passenger and asked if she was embarrassed of Bosquez, who destroyed his brand new car. The latter sped off and was subsequently arrested for criminal mischief in the second degree, menacing in the second degree, and criminal possession of a weapon in the fourth degree with intent to use. Number 1. Incident in Portland. In the fall of 2021, a motorist captured a dramatic road rage confrontation on the streets of Portland, Oregon. Two men had been involved in a fender bender and one of them emerged from his vehicle with a sword. He raised the bladed weapon behind his head, ready to strike as he kept stepping towards the second driver. The latter was seemingly unfazed by the threat as he kept his composure with both arms by his sides. When the attacker went back to his vehicle, the would-be victim popped his trunk. At that point, the onlooker recording them exclaimed, "Oh, what's he gonna get?" He then stopped filming and ducked upon seeing the second driver emerge with an assault rifle, possibly an AK-15. The incident wasn't believed to have resulted in actual violence, and the video of it went viral. Among those reacting to it, one user commented, "Who brings a sword to a gunfight?" while another quipped, "If there was a civil war between Democrats and Republicans, this is what it would look like." Number 8. Erica Boudreau. In June of 2020, a young woman was arrested for allegedly ramming into a man's truck and attempting to strike him with her car as he exited the vehicle. The road rage incident occurred right outside the Englewood Police Department. in Colorado. The suspect was identified as Erica Boudreaux, who'd left a tattoo parlor where she'd had a few drinks when a man in a pickup truck allegedly began following her and hurling insults at her. Their conflict continued down the road until the driver of the truck pulled up to the parking spot outside the police station. As a neighbor later recounted to investigators, Boudreaux then plowed her SUV directly into the parked truck, pushing it through a landscaped area and into a security wall. The truck driver climbed out of his vehicle, at which point Boudreaux backed up before accelerating again in an attempt to strike him where he stood. The man ran into the station and Boudreaux's SUV rammed into a light pole. She subsequently attempted to flee the scene on foot but was caught by Englewood officers. The woman faced a plethora of charges that included attempted first-degree assault, criminal mischief, DUI, reckless driving, and driving with a suspended or revoked license. Number 7. Cornelia Moore. A 27-year-old woman was shot and killed during a road rage incident in Austin, Texas, on September the 4th of 2021. The victim, identified as Cornelia Moore, had contacted the authorities at around 12:30 p.m. She went on to report that someone in a silver Dodge Charger was following her and engaging in road rage-type behavior on Interstate 35. Moore claimed that the individual had struck her vehicle and then pointed a gun in her direction. While still on the phone with emergency dispatchers, Moore was shot by the driver of the Charger, but was able to provide her location before she became unresponsive. Members of the Austin Police Department located the woman's car on the southbound service road of I-35. She'd sustained a single gunshot wound and was ultimately pronounced dead at the scene, in spite of the life-saving measures performed on her by first responders. Homicide investigators were able to identify 2 suspects believed to have been in the Dodge Charger at the time of the shooting. APD arrested 32-year-old Tony McCulloch and Rafini McCorkle, aged 30, both of whom were charged with Moore's murder. The victim was honored by friends and family with a balloon release at Zilker Park on September the 9th. Number 6. Kimberly Ong and Ryan Arakaki. An incensed woman tailed a man who'd cut her off at a shopping center in Honolulu, Hawaii, and berated him while her young child was in the passenger seat of her car. The heated encounter between Kimberly Ong and Ryan Arakaki took place on September the 10th of 2014. The latter driver had cut in front of the woman at the Mauna Lua shopping center near Pearl Harbor, with the maneuver nearly causing a rear-end collision. The man's careless driving elicited a furious response from Ong, who proceeded to follow him for an estimated 5 minutes. As she was tailing him, Ong shouted profanity-laden insults through her window and made obscene gestures towards the other motorist. Arakaki pulled out his cell phone and began to record the altercation. At one point in the conflict, Ong stepped in the middle of the road and exited her vehicle to confront the man. She stuck her head through his driver's side window and continued her expletive-filled rant, all while her young son waited in the car. After tensions died down and the 2 parties went their separate ways, Arakaki uploaded the video recording of the incident online, where it received hundreds of thousands of views. The man knowingly broke the law by using his cell phone while operating a moving vehicle, but he claimed that he wanted evidence of Ong's assault. Investigators deemed the woman's descent on Arakaki's car to have been unauthorized entry into a motor vehicle. Number 5. The Queens road rage robbery. On May the 8th of 2021, an enraged driver assaulted and robbed 2 individuals during a traffic altercation in the New York City borough of Queens. The incident was recorded by nearby surveillance cameras, with the footage showing a white Nissan Sentra striking a grey Honda Accord at about 7 p.m. The 23-year-old driver of the Nissan got out of the car, as did his older male passenger. Giovanni Padin, aged 27, emerged from the Honda along with a female passenger and furiously demanded payment for the damage caused by the collision. Padin then attacked the 2 men, punching them in the face and knocking one of them to the ground. The suspect took the victim's cell phones as well as a wallet belonging to the older man, which reportedly contained an ID and bank cards. Padin and his female companion subsequently returned to his vehicle and sped away from the scene. NYPD investigators were able to positively identify Padin as the attacker, and he was arrested on May the 12th. He was charged with multiple offenses in connection to the road rage event, including second-degree assault and second-degree robbery. Number 4. Mia Renee Gamboa. In September of 2021, a 24-year-old woman was taken into police custody after pointing a firearm at another driver during a road rage episode in Truckee, California. State Highway Patrol officers apprehended Mia Renee Gamboa of Merced just before 6 p.m. on September the 6th. While riding in a car on Interstate 80, Gamboa had reportedly become embroiled in a heated exchange with another motorist, whom she threatened with a handgun. At the time of the incident, the armed woman was sitting in the passenger seat of the vehicle while a man believed to be her boyfriend was driving. There were also 3 children in the car, none of whom belonged to Gamboa. Following the suspect's arrest, investigators searched the vehicle and allegedly found 2 guns, more than $10,000 in cash, and a bottle of OxyContin pills that hadn't been prescribed by a doctor. The male driver was questioned by the police, but he was neither arrested nor charged with any crime. Gamboa was ultimately charged with brandishing a firearm, child endangerment, and possession of narcotics with the intent to distribute. Number 3. Richard Kamrowski and Mark Fitzgerald. In January of 2019, 2 drivers were charged following a road rage incident on the Massachusetts Turnpike in which a man clung to the hood of an SUV as it drove for multiple miles. The confrontation unfolded after 37-year-old Mark Fitzgerald of Lynn swerved in front of Framingham resident Richard Kamrowski, aged 65, and bumped into his car. Fitzgerald attempted to take off following the collision, but Kamrowski stood in front of his vehicle in an effort to stop him. Nevertheless, the driver accelerated, prompting Kamrowski to jump onto the hood of the car to avoid getting run over. He reportedly implored Fitzgerald to stop driving, but he ignored the elderly man's pleas and continued driving down the highway for roughly 3 miles, allegedly reaching speeds of up to 70 miles per hour. Kamrowski unsuccessfully tried to contact 911 with one hand while clinging to the windshield with the other. Fortunately, concerned bystanders boxed Fitzgerald's SUV in and forced him to stop moving, which allowed Kamrowski to safely climb down from the hood of the vehicle. The motorist was forced out of his car by an armed passerby, who reportedly had a license to carry a firearm. Fitzgerald was charged with assault with a dangerous weapon, while Kamrowski was charged with disorderly conduct. Number 2. Candelario Gonzalez. A Florida man fatally shot a fellow motorist during a road rage incident that went horribly wrong in July of 2015. The victim, 44-year-old Candelario Gonzalez, contacted the police about a reckless driver on the roadway during the evening hours of July the 23rd. Gonzalez decided to follow the other vehicle in his own car, inside of which sat his wife, daughter, and grandson. The other driver, who was identified as 51-year-old Robert Doyle, called 911 as well and reported that Gonzalez was trying to run him off the road. Both vehicles eventually reached the former's residence in Beverly Hills, and Gonzalez blocked the homeowner's vehicle in his driveway. At about 10 p.m., Gonzalez stepped out of his car. Doyle, who was armed with a handgun, approached the man and fatally shot him at least 5 times in front of his family. An eyewitness told the authorities that Gonzalez was in the process of backing up when the gun was fired, but Doyle's wife claimed the other driver was charging her husband. Doyle then held the rest of Gonzalez's family at gunpoint until the arrival of Citrus County Sheriff's deputies. The shooter was ultimately arrested and charged with second-degree murder, in addition to 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Roughly a year after the incident had taken place, all the charges against Doyle were dropped. The decision followed a stand your ground hearing by a Citrus County judge who ruled that the man had acted in self-defense. Number 1. The Hollywood Stunts Assault. On September the 29th of 2013, a 33-year-old man was viciously attacked by a gang of motorcyclists on the Henry Hudson Parkway in New York City. The violent altercation was preceded by a 911 call made by Alexian Lynn, who told operators that he'd witnessed a group of bikers run a red light and nearly hit a woman carrying a baby. Leon's wife had reportedly tossed a half-eaten plum and a water bottle at the motorcycles, prompting one of them to punch the driver's side mirror of Leon's SUV. A short while later, a biker allegedly pulled out in front of Leon and decelerated sharply, causing him to make light bumper contact with the motorcycle from behind. Within seconds, the scene devolved into chaos as other bikers charged Leon's vehicle, which was also carrying the couple's 2-year-old daughter. The assailants proceeded to strike and kick the car, compelling Leon to accelerate in an attempt to escape. As he drove away from the scene, Leon ran over 3 motorcyclists, including a man named Edwin Mises, who suffered a fractured spine and a punctured lung. The bikers retaliated by pursuing Leon for several miles. The man's wife contacted 911 a total of 4 times during the 8-minute chase. While Leon was stopped at a red light, one of the bikers got close to his car and shattered the driver's side window with his helmet. Leon was then dragged from the SUV and beaten relentlessly by several of the bikers from the group. They'd allegedly tried to pull the man's wife from the car as well, but were unable to do so because she had her seatbelt on. Bystanders eventually stepped in and put an end to the assault, which left Leon with lacerations to his face and sides. A video of the entire incident was uploaded to Live Leak and subsequently received international attention. Some of the motorcyclists involved in the chase and attack were identified as off-duty police officers. 15 individuals were arrested in connection to the road rage event, and 11 bikers were ultimately convicted.
As I got into the shower, I noticed something in the vent next to the shower head.
23-year-old Ahmed Nash from Edinburgh, Scotland, was horrified to find a hidden camera while showering at the Oxford Wheatley Travelodge in September of 2015. Immediately after noticing the device placed inside a small vent, she contacted the hotel staff. Workers revealed that the camera was linked to a cupboard but indicated that it was inoperative. Hatcher was told by the manager that the device was used only for maintenance purposes. However, after police arrived at the scene, they determined that the camera was attached to a USB cable that dangled into the caretaker's room, allowing it to be potentially connected to any computer. As of the latest available updates on the matter, no arrests had been made. Hatcher stated that the USB cable hadn't been attached to any other devices and that she was hopeful the video hadn't been live streamed. Number 9. Dougie Hamilton. 34-year-old Dougie Hamilton and his girlfriend, Taryn, from Glasgow, Scotland, discovered a spy camera hidden behind a clock at their Airbnb flat in September of 2018. The couple had booked the rental property for them to stay at during their trip to Toronto, Canada. Upon their arrival, Hamilton immediately felt there was something strange about the digital clock hanging on the wall. He claimed to have stared at it for a while before deciding to investigate what exactly made it creepy to him. Much to the couple's shock, they found a hidden camera connected to a wire similar to a phone charger. Hamilton posted the pictures of his discovery on Facebook and contacted Airbnb about the issue. Before heading over to the police department, Airbnb provided Hamilton and his girlfriend with alternative accommodation for the duration of their trip and issued a complete refund. Number 8. Derek Starnes. Wayne Nat, a 56-year-old Airbnb host who'd been renting out his home in Longboat Key, Florida, since 2015 and boasted over 40 reviews, was arrested after guests noticed a hidden camera hidden above the bed. Indiana man Derek Starnes and his wife arrived at their vacation spot on October the 31st of 2017. It wouldn't be until the following day that they noticed what appeared to be a small hole in the smoke detector. Starnes examined the device and, fearing there might be a camera inside, contacted local authorities. After confirming the vacationer's suspicions, police arrested Nat, and a search warrant was issued to examine both his home and computer equipment. Nat told police officers that the cameras were never activated when guests rented his property, a claim that was later proven false after authorities gained access to hours of footage. On July the 26th of 2018, Nat was found guilty of 14 counts of video voyeurism and sentenced to a year behind bars plus 3 years probation. Number 7. Carlin Perry. In December of 2021, Carlin Perry discovered that the smoke detector in her California apartment was not only fake, but was actually a disguised surveillance camera. The tenant was notified by the Sacramento apartment complex's administrator that a maintenance person would be entering her unit to service the fire alarms. She agreed, not suspecting any potential of foul play. She noticed the detector's cover hadn't been properly secured, but didn't think much of it and headed out of town with her boyfriend. When they returned, however, the smoke detector cover had been properly secured. After Perry's boyfriend denied having fixed it himself, the couple examined the device and was shocked to find a notice printed on the back reading, "This is not a smoke detector, will not detect heat or smoke, for video surveillance only." Someone had installed a motion-activated surveillance system which included an SD card. Perry contacted the authorities and a criminal investigation was launched into the matter, but no further information had been released to the media as of December of 2022. Number 6. Vanya Samakova-Reva and Ralitsa Zambazova. Bulgarian exchange students Vanya Samakova-Reva and Ralitsa Zambazova, who'd rented an apartment in Tampa, Florida in 2011, found cameras in every room of the home, including the bathroom. The women, both in their early 20s at the time, had been living in the US for 3 months as part of a work travel program before they noticed surveillance cameras installed in fake smoke detectors. One of the devices had reportedly been aimed at the student's shower. Samakova-Reva and Zambazova used tape to block the camera's view before calling 911. An investigation was launched, with police seeking to determine whether the cameras had been activated as well as who had been responsible for installing them. Number 5. Ana Lucia Becerra and Julia Stopper. Ana Lucia Becerra and Julia Stopper's vacation was ruined when they discovered a hidden camera in the Airbnb home they'd rented in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, during November of 2022. The couple, having already spent a week on the beachfront property, noticed a strange object concealed behind an air vent above the closet. Stopper, who worked as a tattoo artist, took a photo with her cell phone using flash and spotted a glare in the picture, which she concluded could be a camera lens. Upon removing the air vent, Becerra and Stopper discovered not only a hidden camera aimed directly at their bed, but also an audio cable indicating that their private conversations had been recorded as well. The couple fled the rented house and immediately contacted the police. They were stunned to learn that the apartment's owner had fined them $1,684, accusing them of property damage. Becerra and Stopper alerted Airbnb of the situation, and the company launched an internal investigation, assuring the women that legal action would be taken against the host. Number 4. Horacio Minero Hernandez. Tennessee man Horacio Minero Hernandez was arrested in November of 2022 after his wife of 14 years discovered cameras he'd installed in one of the bathrooms of their Nashville home. Minero Hernandez, aged 38, had reportedly remodeled the bathroom used by his wife's daughters. He subsequently told the woman, who was identified only by her TikTok username, New Mummy of 3, that his construction work was completed and the girls could resume taking showers there. Unbeknownst to her, however, Minero Hernandez had hidden a camera in the light fixture. New Mummy of 3 published a video in which she filmed the discovery of the camera, explaining she was trying to change the light bulb, which had stopped working after the repairs, at which point she realized what her husband had done. She immediately fled the home along with her teenage daughters and contacted the police. During a recorded conversation with Minero Hernandez, she asked him why he had done it. Initially, he explained that he found the camera at work and wanted to check if it worked. When pressed, he admitted he'd made a mistake, saying, "When you have something wrong in your head, you just do it without thinking." During interrogation, he assured police he'd never watched his wife's daughters showering, as the camera didn't work properly. Minero Hernandez, who'd illegally entered the country, was charged with 2 counts of attempted exploitation and arrested without bond after the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office lodged to detain her. Number 3. Zoe Klopfer. Zoe Klopfer, a 25-year-old fitness model from California, discovered that her housemate, William Francis, had installed a spy camera in her bathroom. In a video she uploaded to her social media accounts on July the 24th of 2019, Klopfer explained how Francis, a photographer and videographer employed by Drone Tech Films, had left what seemed to be an iPhone charger in her bathroom. However, it turned out to be a decoy with a pinhole camera installed, which he'd strategically placed in order to record Klopfer naked. When she finally realized the truth, the model removed the memory card hidden inside the device and uploaded the content to her computer. In it, she found 271 files, although not all of the videos featured Klopfer. She explained how Francis had taken the purported charger wherever he went, and he was thus able to spy on several other women over time. Although one of the videos featured her former housemate setting up the camera, police told Klopfer it could take years before Francis would face the legal consequences for his actions. On January the 13th of 2018, roughly 7 months after he'd been released from prison, a senior citizen was arrested for carrying out an armed robbery at an Arizona credit union. Career criminal Robert Krebs, at the time in his early 80s, had spent most of his adult life behind bars. His stints had included 3 years for a 1966 conviction in Chicago for embezzling $72,000 from a bank, where he'd worked as a teller. He'd spent over 30 years in prison for a bank robbery he'd carried out in Florida in 1981, and had also been convicted of theft and armed robbery in Arizona. As reported by the Orlando Sentinel, Krebs had used a disguise involving cotton in his cheeks and a wig for the 1981 heist. He'd also varnished his fingertips so that he wouldn't leave any prints. A branch manager activated a silent alarm and Krebs was taken into custody as he walked into the bank's parking lot. 37 years after his latest heist and several months following his prison release, Krebs entered the Pyramid Federal Credit Union branch on Tucson's northern edge. He placed a pistol, which later turned out to be a BB gun, on the counter and demanded cash. The senior citizen walked off with an estimated $8,400, but was arrested at a hotel the following day after he was recognized from surveillance footage distributed by the police. Krebs subsequently told investigators that he hadn't worn the disguise on purpose because he wanted to get caught and return to prison. He described the months following his release as the worst he'd ever experienced, as he struggled to adjust to life on the outside and survive on his monthly $800 Social Security payment. Krebs' lawyer had said that the man had claimed he wanted to get out of the freedom business. The 84-year-old appeared during his 2021 sentencing in a wheelchair and had trouble hearing what was said in the courtroom. He declined to answer the judge when asked if he accepted responsibility for his actions before receiving his sentence of more than 21 years in prison. Number 7. Richard Harvey. On September the 20th of 2022, Michigan woman Joan Jacobson, aged 83, was on her first day as a volunteer, canvassing homes for the Right of Life organization. Her duties involved going door to door and asking voters to oppose Proposition 3 during an upcoming ballot measure. The proposition would have guaranteed abortion rights in the Michigan Constitution. She reached the home of Richard and Sharon Harvey near Lake Odessa and got into an argument with the latter. Sharon told her that she'd had a tubal pregnancy in 1971 that required surgery and nearly killed her, with the experience in becoming a focal point in their dispute. The exchange, which took place on the couple's porch, lasted 3 to 4 minutes before 72-year-old Richard emerged from a barn with a rifle and shot Jacobson. Although suffering from intense pain, the elderly woman managed to drive herself to the Lake Odessa Police Department. She was rushed to a Grand Rapids hospital via ambulance, where doctors found that the bullet had narrowly missed her spine and had become lodged in soft tissue between her shoulder and collarbone. Jacobson survived the shooting, and Richard was arrested for felonious assault and 2 misdemeanor firearms charges, for which he faced up to 6 years behind bars. The senior citizen maintained that he'd intended to fire a warning shot to scare Jacobson as she was aggressively waving her clipboard and umbrella in his wife's face. He claimed that he then tried to use the rifle to club the clipboard out of her hand, but that he'd accidentally pulled the trigger while the weapon was pointing at her. In the 911 call that followed the incident, Richard claimed that he hadn't shot the woman, whom he described to the operator as a right-wing nut, on purpose. Accounts on the circumstances surrounding the gunshot also differed, as Jacobson claimed it occurred without warning as she was walking away from the home. The Harveys, however, stated that she was belligerent and refused to leave the property, in spite of being asked to do so multiple times. Number 6. Beverly Baker. A family from Pasadena, California, were considering moving home in late October of 2022 after their elderly neighbor attacked their house with a pickaxe during what was reported as a mental breakdown. Part of the incident, which occurred on October the 24th, was caught by the Ring doorbell camera of chiropractor Armand Chukadrian. The clip showed 65-year-old Beverly Baker approaching his house with a pickaxe on her shoulder. The woman then started swinging the tool and smashing Chukadrian's windows. She was recorded yelling out, "Questions? Questions, anyone? I'll be back. Get out!" Chukadrian's mother-in-law and baby daughter at home. As Baker's charge on the property unfolded, the child was sleeping in a bassinet near the windows and would have likely suffered serious injuries if her grandmother hadn't intervened and pulled her away. The authorities were called and arrested Baker at her home, which was only a few blocks from the scene of the attack. Later that evening, she was charged with 1 felony count of vandalism. As reported by the Pasadena Police Department, she and Chukadrian had no relation and she had no record with the department. Law enforcement suspected that the pickaxe incident had been the product of a mental health emergency that the woman was experiencing at the time. Chukadrian and his family were considering changing their address, as Baker's attack on their property had left them feeling unsafe in their home. Number 5. Connecticut Group. A group of 6 elderly Connecticut residents were arrested at the Grace Richardson Conservation Area in Fairfield in August of 2019. Surveillance in the wooded region had recently been increased following reports that lewd activity was taking place on the premises. The park had been advertised on at least one city hookup guide as a meetup spot. On August the 9th, concerned citizens called the police and reported one such incident. A group of elderly residents, 5 men and 1 woman, were consequently caught having relations in the woodland. They were identified by the CT Post as Daniel Dobbins, Otto Williams, John Linnartz, and Charles Ardito, along with Richard Butler and his wife Joyce, both of whom were in their 80s. They were all arrested and charged with breach of peace, with Dobbins and Linnartz also being charged with public indecency. The former had been arrested in the past for second-degree breach of peace after he was spotted walking naked through a public park. When law enforcement found the 67-year-old, he was inside his car, wearing no underwear, with his shirt and shorts draped over him. Number 4. Vera Anthony. An 85-year-old woman was taken into custody by law enforcement in Lady Lake, Florida, in the summer of 2019 on a charge of battery on a person over the age of 65. According to the arrest report, Vera Anthony had become the main aggressor during a fight with an elderly man. Anthony, who had no prior criminal history, reportedly struck the unnamed victim with a television remote. The authorities were called following the altercation, which wasn't reported to have left the man with serious injuries. Anthony, a native of Sayre, Pennsylvania, was subsequently booked at the Sumter County Detention Center. Number 3. Robert Champini. In July of 2019, a senior citizen from New Hampshire was arrested for abusing a female resident at the nursing home where they were both residents. The unnamed 83-year-old victim was staying at the Crestwood nursing home after she had suffered a stroke. Robert Champini forced himself on her in June, and the attack was immediately reported to local authorities. They tracked down 74-year-old Champini to a Manchester hotel and took him into custody. It wasn't made immediately clear if he had an attorney, and his phone number was disconnected. He was released of his own recognizance and scheduled for a court appearance later in July. Number 2. Donald Sturton. On the afternoon of March the 7th of 2018, senior citizen Donald Sturton walked into a Bank of America branch in South Portland, Maine. He asked a young woman working as a teller to turn over the money, telling her he had a gun loaded with 8 bullets. 70-year-old Sturton, who'd made no effort to conceal his identity, put one hand on the counter while the other was inside his jacket, suggesting he was about to pull out a weapon. The teller nervously gave him the money in her top drawer, which amounted to $895. Sturton then walked out of the bank. He displayed no urgency in his getaway and didn't have a car waiting for him, so he planned to take the bus home. South Portland police arrived at the scene within minutes. They held Sturton who appeared to have been waiting for them at gunpoint and took him into custody. The police recovered the stolen cash and a water gun, which the senior citizen had had on him during the heist. As he was interviewed by detectives, Sturton not only confessed but claimed that he wanted to get caught. He reported that he'd struggled with depression and no longer felt like a productive member of society. Sturton added that he'd woken up that day with one of two choices in his mind. Either he'd rob the bank or take his own life. He reportedly regarded spending a few years in prison as something potentially beneficial to his mental health. The water gun in his possession was held together with black tape and had previously been used by Sturton to train his cats not to scratch household items. He claimed to have brought it with him for fear that he wouldn't be taken seriously otherwise. Sturton was charged with Class B robbery, for which he faced up to 10 years in prison, but given his age, mental state, and lack of criminal record, prosecutors were expected to be lenient. Number 1. Kenneth Montgomery. In late November of 2022, a woman and her son were ambushed and shot outside a store in Mesa, Arizona. 27-year-old Albert Liotta and his mother, Antoinette, were in separate vehicles in the parking lot of a Hobby Lobby store. 65-year-old Kenneth Montgomery parked his truck in front of their cars and unloaded a 9mm pistol into them. 10 shell casings were subsequently recovered from the scene. Albert called 911 in the immediate aftermath. He was taken to a hospital with gunshot wounds to both legs, while his 61-year-old mother was pronounced dead at the scene. Maricopa County deputies found Montgomery as he was climbing into the bed of a stranger's pickup truck in the area of Bush Highway northeast of Mesa. The handgun he'd used in the shooting was recovered with blood on it from Montgomery's truck, which was located near the Butcher Jones recreation site. Following his arrest, he admitted to the authorities that he'd shot the mother and son because he thought they'd been involved in prior criminal activity. He added that anybody would have done the same. It was, however, determined by the police that the senior citizen and the victims didn't know each other. Montgomery was held at the Maricopa County Jail on a $1 million bond and charges that included second-degree murder and aggravated assault. Thanks for watching. Would you rather know how your love life would unfold or how you were going to die? Let us know in the comments section below.